Hello, I'm John Hemingway. Welcome back to Shropshire. Now, it's a bit of a different episode today because for the first time we have got a guest, which is pretty exciting. And that guest is Ben Strugnell. Now, Ben Strugnell is a pretty well-known vet in the farm vet community. He's pretty well published as well, and he has spent his career focusing on farm animal post-mortems. So stick with us on this longer than usual episode to talk post-mortems, when to do them, when not to do them, and a whole lot of other stuff as well. I hope you enjoy it. Okay, so hello Ben, and thanks for joining us. It's probably best, Ben. I mean, you're pretty well known within the farm vet community, but perhaps not nationwide throughout the farming community. So, I mean, do you want to spend a minute or two just explaining who you are and what you do for a living?
I qualified in 2002 from Edinburgh, and then I was in mixed practice for about 5 years. And then I joined the VLA, which is the government lab that does endemic disease surveillance at Thirsk for another about 6 years. And then in 2014, in collaboration with Eblex, all the post-mortem arrangements were being reviewed in that year. And we moved into a village that has a big knackers yard. And I said to the people, why don't we do post-mortems at the knackers yard, which would save farmers having to deliver things into the VLA. It would mean you can stack them higher and sell them cheaper. And it means I can just, get to a diagnosis if there's one to be had quicker. So we built the PM room here and opened the doors in 2014. And that year, I think we did about 1,500 PMs in that year. And basically, I've just been doing it ever since, really. So
I see on your biography it says I've done examined more than 8,000 carcasses. It's not a sort of common thing to come across on a CV, is it?
What a claim, yeah.
It was relatively earlier on for you that you went out of first spinning practice and into APHA or VI centre up there. I mean, what some people might quite understandably ask what the attraction is of sort of spending your veterinary career just pulling apart dead animals.
Well, there's two things really. One is it's very interesting, and I think you have probably more chance of getting to the bottom of things. And secondly, I just can't bear the wastefulness. You know, when things die, that's preventable. It is a complete waste. Because everything you've done, all the resources you put into that animal, whether it's a lamb, whether you've tucked the ewe, you've fed the ewe, you've lambed it, you've tagged it, you've put a tag in its ear, you've fed it grass, you've fed it creep, everything you've done up to that point is wasted. Yeah. And if you can, figure out what's happened to that lamb, you can, and stop it with the others, you can prevent all that wastage. And I just can't bear the wastage. And for me, when I was looking at it, I thought the dead ends is where the wastage is most acute. And if you can make diagnoses on the dead ends to save the live ones, then it's a no-brainer. And that's the basic premise, really.
Yeah, so every dead animal is an opportunity to prevent the next one. And I suppose that that's especially true with things like endemic parasitism and any day, even on farm, presumably you would encourage this time of year, if somebody has a dead lamb for any reason, check the liver for fluke. I mean, that's a no-brainer, surely. Yeah,
absolutely. A lot of the things in lambs, you can diagnose them just with your own two eyes, or with your own two eyes and a photo, and then send the photo to somebody who might know, and just make a diagnosis. Because really, what have you got to lose?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would encourage people to send their photos to you rather than me for advocating that service. That's fine. So, I mean, you may have sort of answered the next question then with that response, but in terms of, there's this expression that you will have heard as much as me, which is, where there's livestock, there's dead stock, and that's an inevitable part of livestock farming, and that is, I suppose, true to an extent.
at what point among the inevitable
Mm.
mortality rate, or when we're talking about abortion inquiries, the 2% of sheep abortions that are within normal limits, where do you draw the line? Where do you say, okay, at this point, there's likely to be a return, it is worthwhile investigating, or is it always worthwhile investigating?
Well, it depends on your model, I think. Normally, that decision isn't up to me. Normally, it's up to the farmer who decides, well, I've just had too many now, and this is out of the ordinary, and it's their decision to send me one. So normally, that isn't my decision to make. But on some farms, I have a model where every single sheep that dies, that's tups, lambs, and ewes, get routinely comes round to me in the PM room, and I have a look and I make a diagnosis. And at the end of the year, we write a histogram or a graph of all the causes of mortality in lambs and all the causes of mortality in ewes. And then we use that with the vets, or the vets and the farmer use that to say, well, where is my lowest hanging fruit and where's my best place to spend a pound to make a pound? Do you know what I mean? So
Yep.
I sort of bypass that question by on some farms doing everything. And on other farms, I think the farmer just sticks his fingers in the air and says, I've just lost a bit too many than I thought. And so they send them to me. And in terms of what's an acceptable mortality, or ewe mortality or lamb mortality, well, I think it varies from farm to farm.
Yep.
And with what endemic diseases you have.
Yeah, and I mean to pick up on what you said about what's the low hanging fruit on this farm when you've built up a relationship, a picture on that farm. Presumably there are instances where you will find you'll make a diagnosis on a dead animal, and you say, well, this was the cause of death, but actually this is not something that you should spend your time or money at the moment. But yeah. Is that a common occurrence that you find something?
Yeah, when you find, let's say, I don't know, let's say you find a tumor in an old sheep or something, which is the reason why it's in. I think, oh well, I've done a post-mortem there and found a diagnosis where they don't have to do anything, so I feel a bit disappointed by that. But normally the farmer says, well, that's brilliant. It's all I want to know is nobody else is going to die, and that's great. Peace of mind is worth a lot, I think.
Of course.
I think to know that something isn't your fault, or that there isn't anything you could have done to prevent it, and it's just within the normal range of things, I think that peace of mind is worth a lot.
Yeah. I mean, that's interesting, and that would bring me to my next question, really about and a very unfair question. If I was to say, what of all the dead animals, what is a diagnosis rate that you make? Because I see the reason I asked this. As a first opinion vet, we do hear sometimes when you recommend taking something in for post-mortem at VIC Shrewsbury, which is just on our doorstep. We say, oh, well, we took stuff there once and they never found anything. And we'd say, in my experience, because all the reports come back through us, that's not the case at all, actually. Diagnoses are made in the vast majority of cases. So, I mean, I'll put that question to you. What's your experience of that? And is there a relevance actually to a completely unexceptional dead animal where you don't settle on a definitive cause of death?
Yeah, it's funny. I hear that story a lot as well. And so I have two things to say about that. One is, in my report, I always copy the farmer into my report. I copy the farmer in and I copy his vet in. So when they have an email, which is mostly, and I always include a photo, and and it's always one page, and it always has photos, and the biggest box always is diagnosis, because I think some people, that's all they're going to read. So the diagnosis is parasitic gastroenteritis, ovine pulmonary adenocarcinoma, myelofibrosis, whatever it is, wire. The diagnosis is there in a big box. So the potential for things getting lost in translation is as small as you can get it. The question of how often do you make a diagnosis leads you on to the next question, which is, what are your diagnostic criteria, right? So there are lots of diagnoses where you don't need to do any further testing to make the diagnosis, where the diagnosis is made on the basis of gross findings alone, like dosing gun injury, wire, probably Pasteurella pneumonia, probably Dystonia trachelosis, septicemia. So there's a load of those, which probably accounts for about half, I would say. Depends on the species and it varies, but probably about half the diagnoses fall into that category. The next one is diagnoses where you need to be a bit more certain. So I would put bovine respiratory disease in that category, with the exception of IBR, where you almost always need to do histopathology to find out really what's going on.
Which pathogen, yeah.
Exactly, which pathogen, how chronic, how long's it been there, all that stuff. So to some extent, it depends on how much money you want to spend and how sure you need to be. So but within reason, I think you can probably make a diagnosis with a reasonable amount of further testing, if required, in about 75% of cases, I would have thought. And in the cases where you don't make a diagnosis, it's normally because there's no gross findings, and then and then you say, well, look, it probably isn't going to be worth pursuing this because it's not the best way to spend your money. If you have another one, then spend the money. But at this moment, I don't think it's worth spending 50 quid on more diagnostics, because you're not going to get your 50 quid back, because the problem at the moment doesn't justify it. So the question is a bit determined by, if I do a diagnostic test, I need to know what I'm going to do. If I get result A, I'm going to do B. If I get result C, I'm going to do D. If I'm not going to do anything different on the basis of the diagnostic test, then don't do the test and make the assumption that your working hypothesis is your diagnosis, albeit you might not be quite as sure as you were if you didn't do the test.
Yeah, okay. And would you go as far as to say, actually, that in the majority of sheep post-mortem findings that are going to be relevant to some sort of intervention on the rest of the flock, the majority of those illnesses are identifiable on gross post-mortem without having to go and do a histo or
I think that's a completely fair comment, with the exception probably of the neurological ones that like and listeria, where you have to do, but most of them, vast majority of them, yes, you can make a diagnosis that you're sure enough about without having to do lots of further testing normally. Yes, I think that's fair to say.
The neurological diseases you list there, CCN and listeria, I mean, really they ought to be diagnosable before death, and fairly distinct symptoms in those shouldn't necessarily need to rely on post-mortem, do they? Right, okay. No, that's interesting. So I mean, you see a lot of dead stuff, obviously, day in, day out. I mean, you must have seen some fairly bizarre causes of death.
I have in the past. This just shows you how indiscriminate eaters cattle are. I had a cow that was out at grass, and they found it dead, and it had a wire, it had a perforation of its reticulum into its heart, and the perforation was actually caused by a cake knife, would you believe? And somebody had had a picnic in the field of these cows, and they'd left the knife there, and this cake knife, the cow had swallowed it, managed to get it down its esophagus, ended up in its reticulum, penetrated its heart, and by the time the thing died, this cake knife was lodged still in its reticulum, but poking into its heart and through the diaphragm with this cake knife. Imagine that.
What length knife are we talking? Like a
6-inch knife, yeah, like you would cut your birthday cake with. Amazing. I mean, amazing. They're just such indiscriminate eaters,
I remember, not long after I graduated, a farmer phoned to say that he just watched one of his cows eat a 2-litre plastic bottle that somebody had thrown into the field, and what should he do about it? I'm like, don't know. I don't know.
Leave it there, it'll be all right.
Well, okay, yeah. So, I mean, one of the things to touch on, just going back to a video that we made a few weeks ago on iceberg disease, because obviously iceberg disease is in sheep. We're talking in this part of the country, I think, from what I see, predominantly Johne's disease. Then there's OPA, which obviously the further north you get, it appears that the more you get, that's Yark's disease. And then CLA, probably third on the list in the UK. Unless you disagree with me. So I mean, did you see much CLA?
No, I don't really see much. I can't really get very excited about it, but see more MV probably.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. In that video, we talked about identifying whether there's an iceberg disease there, and first doing a cost benefit analysis on actually whether there was a return on doing something about that. The only is it's very difficult in a lot of sheep management systems to address that in any other way than vaccinating in a commercial setting. But when it comes to OPA, this was a topic of a fairly recent bit of research that you did, looking at actually the incidence of the illness that you need, or the prevalence within your flock, before there's a return on actually investigating that. And it was when you presented that at SVS, it was not entirely uncontroversial with one or two audience members, as I recall. So, I mean, without getting into too much depth, and we'll just make this the last point, but did you want to give a very quick sort of overview of what you did there in that OPA study, and what you found?
So it was 1,000 ewe flock that had OPA diagnosed on a post-mortem, I think, that was sent into a VLA regional lab. Having done a bit of surveillance before on some cull ewes, and they said, right, we want to know how many carriers we have, so we want to so we can cull them. And so they ultrasound scanned 1,000 ewes. The scanner that did it is not the sort of founding father of OPA scanning, but a different fellow, and he found 50 that were suspicious. All those 50 were killed on the basis that they had OPA, and of those 50, when I followed them to the abattoir, only 13 of them had confirmed OPA on gross and histological, post-mortem of the lungs, which I retrieved from the abattoir when they were killed. So under those circumstances, there were lots of false positives using that technique. So under those circumstances, they killed a lot of sheep they didn't need to kill, and don't really know how many sheep that did have OPA they didn't kill, because whoever would ever know that, what's the specificity. So in those hands, it was rather alarmingly the false positive rate was too high. But what I would, and so in some people's books, that's enough to dismiss the technique and say that it's too risky. I must say that in other people's hands, I've found it to be extremely accurate. And when other people have been and scanned sheep and have found positives and have sent them to me, in some people's hands, I find it very reliable, as in all the sheep they diagnose do turn out to be OPA. How many they miss, I don't know. But so I'm rather conflicted about it. And and in the absence of any other useful diagnostic intervention in the live animal, I wouldn't write off ultrasound scanning completely, as long as you get your homework marked properly, and as long as you make an effort to any sheep that you scan with OPA, kill it and do a post-mortem and make sure that you've done 200 and you're reasonably accurate, although that does work out quite expensive. So this is one of the motivations for doing the all sheep that die post-mortem system, because then you can get a reasonable estimate of prevalence within flock prevalence to answer the question that you just asked: have I got a big enough problem to need to worry about it? So that's my normal answer is, well, because I think if you've got OPA, you're going to find it more likely in dead ones than in cull ones, because by definition, if they've got OPA, they're probably more likely to get pneumonia.
Yes.
So they're going to die rather than live to be culls. And having done that, I don't think that all sheep with OPA are necessarily thin or necessarily exercise intolerant. And I have found OPA on farms with a high enough prevalence to worry. According to the studies, the within flock prevalence is likely to be somewhere between 2% and 10%, as determined by transthoracic ultrasound, confirmed, with follow-up confirmation. And so by definition, if you go out and scan 1,000 sheep and you get more than 10%, or even if you're nudging towards 10%, you have to ask yourself the question: have I got too many false positives here? And I think the inter-operator variability is just, at the moment, unacceptably high. So with some personal people exceptions, I don't think I could recommend it.
You would put all the emphasis really on making sure that the sheep specific operator has got the specificity of the test as high as possible before actually embarking on that in a sort of commercial way. Yeah,
absolutely. Too many people do it, assume they're right, and don't follow up, and the sheep go off the cull. And because otherwise you lose a lot of money to get your homework marked. That's where the expensive bit is forfeiting the cull value of the ewe.
Of course.
And going to the abattoir and get lungs is quite expensive and awkward. So but I think there are too many people at the moment that do it without validating themselves, full stop. If it could be done by lay scanners, I think that probably is the future, because that's the only way of cost effectively doing a lot. If they can be properly validated, then I would be happy lay scanners doing it. People who do pregnancy scanning, they do that for 3 months of the year, and for another 3 months of the year, they can go and do OPA scanning. But that's a conversation that needs to be had with the RCVS, because I think to make it sustainable, it has to be cheap. And for it to be cheap, don't know whether vets are going to be willing to do it at a quick enough speed for it to be cheap enough for it to be worthwhile.
Well, why do vets not do pregnancy scanning in sheep? For the same reason.
But on the farms where I do a lot of PMs and have found a lot of OPA, the interesting question is, what do you do then? What do you do about it? And the answer is, I think, if I find OPA on a flock at a reasonable prevalence in the deadens, 4-5%, my first question is, have you got MV as well? And if up here, it'll be a flock that's been buying in mules for donkey's years, and they bought in, every year they buy in 100 mules from 98 different farms, and they buy in every disease under the sun. They've been doing that for 20 years, and so they've got lots of different diseases. And I've got OPA, right? Maybe enough to do anything, maybe that may not. Then you need to bleed 30 odd thin ones every year to see if you've got MV as well. And if you've got MV at a reasonable prevalence, then I think you've got a choice of forever chasing the diagnostics and being behind the curve and all the rest of it, spending a lot of money on diagnostics, or do something more radical and just say, this is not a problem, it's an opportunity to move to improve your genetics completely, separate your flock, buy in 200 clean female replacements and tup them, maternal sheep, and tup them with a maternal tup, start to run an A flock and a B flock, and eventually your A flock gets bigger and your B flock, dirty flock, gets smaller. Put tags in all your lamb's ears, record everything on your A flock, which is your flock which provides your replacements, and make sure whatever you want to select for, be that growth rate, be that worm resistance, be that maternal ability, be that 8-week weights, which is a proxy for milk yields, start to do all that stuff. Spend your time, effort and money on upgrading your flock genetics, and just kiss goodbye to your dirty flock and phase it out, rather than spending a lot of money chasing your tail on MV bloods and sheep with OPA.
Look at where the cost of production losses are. What's the best way to invest in actually getting rid of this problem? Is it keep tackling it, or is it start anew? Well, we are getting short on time. It has been, and we've also digressed slightly from the topic of post-mortem. But that's fine. But no, that has been fascinating to chat to you, Ben, and thank you for coming on. And I hope people found that interesting, and I think they will have found it useful. So thank you again.
Pleasure.